very good evening, dear students. Welcome to BAJIRAO IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. So today is 23rd July 2025, and today we have some very important topics for the discussion. So one by one, we'll try to discuss all these important topics in a very detailed and in-depth manner. And the first topic with which we are going to start the session is about India and China relations and the Buddhism conflict. And this topic has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and this could be important for your mains examination, particularly for the gender studies paper 2, right? Because we have an international relations section in gender studies paper 2. Now apart from that, this is very important for your interview as well. So let's try to understand the India-China relations from the perspective of Buddhism. Now, what is the context? Very briefly, we'll try to understand the context of this topic. So one thing that we should understand, that there has been increasing maritime tensions between India and China, and this is very clear. Now, when I say maritime tensions, China follows a policy called string of pearls. So I hope all of you knew about this strategy of China. So this is a strategic encircling of India, and which is called as a strategy string of pearls of China. Now apart from that, in recent times, Chinese naval presence in the Indian Ocean region has been substantially increasing. So that will be the second factor. And the third factor is that Chinese investments in India's neighboring countries, particularly Maldives, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Bangladesh, all these countries have been increasing. So this has led to what? This has led to the maritime tensions between both India and China. And apart from that, there is a strategic contest as well. So strategic contest in the sense that China has been arming Pakistan. China has been supporting the cross-border terrorism or terrorist organizations based out of Pakistan. And along with that, we have a prolonged India-China border tensions at the line of actual control. One such example is Galwan clashes that took place in the year 2020. So we can say that there is a real strategic contest and maritime tensions between both India and China. So all these factors have been further intensifying in the Himalayas, right? And in fact, the line of actual control clashes or Galwan clashes between India and China, or the differences or the aggression from the China at India's border. So all these factors have been taking place near Himalayas. So in fact, the influence over Buddhist religious institutions and spiritual succession is being weaponized for the geopolitical leverages. So one thing that we should understand, that India is the birthplace of Buddhism. So despite India being the birthplace of Buddhism, what China has been doing? So China has been using Buddhism to further its soft power. And in fact, China has also using this Buddhist religious institutions and the spiritual succession, and they are being weaponized by China for their geopolitical leverage, right? So in recent times, you might have seen a conflict between India and China about this, particularly Dalai Lama's presence in India. China even strongly protests if Dalai Lama is going to visit Arunachal Pradesh, right? So even Prime Minister Narendra Modi wishes Dalai Lama on his birthday, then also China protests. So therefore, China has been clearly weaponizing Buddhism, right? So therefore, in this context, we'll be understanding spirituality and sovereignty, and there is a shift in paradigm. Now in fact, the places called Ladakh, Tawang, and even Bhutan, so they are centers of mediation. centers of meditation, they are the centers of monasteries, right? But they are now positioned at the crossroads of the national strategy, right? So Ladakh, Tawang and Bhutan, all these places. So therefore it has been symbolizing a fusion of sacred space with state objectives. And apart from that, the issue of recognizing the next Dalai Lama. So who will be the next Dalai Lama? So China has been claiming that the China have the rights to recognize the next Dalai Lama. So these factors have transcended the spiritual boundaries. They have been assuming the geopolitical and geostrategic nature, right? So it has become a question of sovereignty, because China has been asserting the exclusive authority, because China has been saying that we have the exclusive right to recognize the next Dalai Lama, and the next Dalai Lama's selection process through its 2007 ordinance. This is what China has been saying. So, and apart from that, China has institutionalized Buddhism through its bureaucratic tools as well. Now, despite India being the birthplace of Buddhism, China has been effectively leveraging Buddhism to further its soft power. And here, China has clearly institutionalized Buddhism through the bureaucratic tools. Now, the bureaucratic tools included databases of recognized lamas, while repurposing the religious diplomacy that is centered around Buddhism to consolidate the cultural influence across the entire Himalayan belt. So China has been using Buddhism for the cultural influence around the region, right? So therefore, to some extent, India has failed to utilize or use Buddhism to further its soft power. However, India has adopted a reactive posture, and there is an emerging strategy as well, because India hosted Dalai Lama in the year 1959, and it has provided moral capital, but it lacked a strategic orientation. There is a lack of strategic orientation from the Indian side until the efforts begin to leverage the Buddhist diplomacy, right? So India should leverage its Buddhist diplomacy to further its soft power. So recently India started leveraging this through pilgrim circuits, heritage promotion, etc., because there is a huge scope and potential for India to further its soft power in Southeast Asia, East Asia, and beyond the Asian continent as well, right? So that will help India to further its aspirations of being a global leader. However, unlike China's centrally coordinated Buddhist statecraft. Now, if you look at Chinese Buddhist statecraft, which is centrally coordinated, and more effective and more influential also. But India's engagement with Buddhist communities, so it actually remains fragmented approach, right? So India's engagement with this Buddhist community can be called as a fragmented approach, and this fragmented approach lacks a cohesive policy backing, right? So as I have already told you, that if you look into the Chinese Buddhist statecraft, which is centrally coordinated, but India's Buddhist statecraft is not centrally coordinated, it lacks a cohesive policy backing and it remains fragmented as well, right? So one thing that we should understand is that Buddhism has a lot of strategic importance for India. So therefore India should recognize and understand the strategic importance of Buddhism, and there should be a centrally coordinated policy to leverage Buddhism much more effectively, to further soft power to fulfill its geopolitical and geostrategic objectives. However, the impending succession of the 14th Dalai Lama, that will be expected outside China's territory. So it is being said that the 14th Dalai Lama's succession would be expected outside China's territory. But China has been saying that China has the sole right to recognize the next Dalai Lama. And in fact, it is being said that the 14th Dalai Lama's succession would be expected in India, and it could lead to a dual climates, and that would risk a deep schism across the Tibetan Buddhism, thereby forcing regional actors to align ideologically as well as politically with both differences within the Tibetan Buddhism. Right. So however, if you look into some sensitive border regions in India, for example Arunachal Pradesh, which shares its borders with China, and China has been very often and frequently changing names in Arunachal Pradesh, despite India saying that Arunachal Pradesh is an integral part of India. Ladakh and Sikkim, so these are also some sensitive border regions. Now, the spiritual legitimacy of these border regions can reinforce or destabilize the nationalist sentiments, thereby making a monastic loyalty a strategic asset. And in fact, China has been heavily investing in infrastructure in Lumbini, which is the birthplace of Buddha in Nepal, to quite a monastic diplomacy that China follows in with Bhutan. So China has been methodically building influence among the Himalayan Buddhist communities, right? So this influence will help China enormously, right? So China has been planning to build this influence among the Himalayan Buddhist communities so that China can align these Buddhist communities with its geopolitical interests. So it will help China further its geopolitical interests. And apart from that, there are some internal sectarian rifts within the Himalayan Buddhist communities or the Tibetan Buddhist communities. For example, the divided Karma Kogyu leadership. Now, what is Karma Kogyu leadership? So Karma Kagyu is a prominent lineage within the Tibetan Buddhism's Kagyu school, and in fact it is also one of the 4 major schools, and it is also well known for the practice of Mahamudra meditation and its lineage of reincarnation of lamas and karmapas. And apart from such rifts, a contested Dorje Shugden practice. Now, what is a Dorje Shugden practice? So it is a deity within Tibetan Buddhism, and in fact it is specifically associated with Gelug school in Tibetan Buddhism. However, there is a significant controversy around this Dorje Shugden, because some view him as a protector and others view him as a potentially harmful entity. So therefore there is a contestation about Dorje Shugden practice, and they are being exploited by the powers, turning the religious disputes into the geopolitical footholds as well. So it is very clear that China has been leveraging the differences among different communities, and China has also been effectively utilizing the Buddhist influence to Buddhism to influence the Himalayan communities to achieve the geopolitical and geostrategic objectives. Now, in this context, India has been following a reactive policy rather than a proactive policy, right? So I hope you have understood this particular topic. So the next topic is, recently Union Cabinet clears UK India Free Trade Agreement, right? So the context is that Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to UK for the formal signing of India UK Free Trade Agreement marks a pivotal moment in the bilateral ties, right? So it is a landmark and pivotal movement for the bilateral relations between India and UK. Now we have been experiencing the global uncertainty because of the Russia-Ukraine war, Middle East crisis, energy crisis, and even the tariff war started by US President Donald Trump, because of which we have been experiencing the global uncertainty that is driven by volatile US foreign policy and Chinese much more assertiveness. So in this backdrop, the free trade agreement between India and UK is a landmark agreement, and apart from that, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to UK is also one of the landmark visit. Now, if we talk about the historical backdrop and strategic lag between India and UK relations. Now, both India and UK have a colonial past, because UK was once a colonial power which ruled over India. And apart from that, we also have the historical linkages, right? So however, both India and UK, they have underestimated the mutual strategic potential. So it is being said that they have a huge strategic potential, but they have underestimated this strategic potential, and that is actually constrained by imperial British sentiment and India's post-colonial caution. Now, why India don't engage with UK? Why India don't engage with UK? The reason being is that we have adopted a cautious approach after our independence towards UK, because UK was an imperialist power which ruled over India, and that's why we have adopted a cautious approach towards UK. But why UK is not able to maintain a very good and friendly relations with India? Because of their post-imperialist sentiment. They were imperial power, and their views towards India have actually constrained them to maintain good relations or friendly relations with India. However, there was some enthusiasm in relations between India and UK during 1990s. At that point of time, India opened up its economy through LPG reforms, right? So liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So during 1990s, UK's Prime Minister was Conservative PM John Major, right? So however, the problem is that such enthusiasm did not materialize into a sustained strategic cooperation. So there was enthusiasm, there was no doubt about that, but it was failed to materialize into a sustained strategic cooperation between India and UK, right? So this is primarily because of the policy incoherence which was existing between India and UK. So policy incoherence is because of the different priorities both countries have adopted, and apart from that, the global distractions as well. Global distractions. So these factors have led to the failed relations between India and UK despite such enthusiasm which was existing. However, the decline of American strategic commitment, particularly in Europe and other parts of the world, Southeast Asia and Middle East. So I would say there has been a decline in American strategic commitment throughout the world, right? So particularly after Trump became the president of the United States of America, and Trump adopting the protectionist policies. So one such example of such protectionist policies is America First policy, right? America First policy, so which is an example of a protectionist policy, right? So therefore there has been a decline in American strategic commitment, and apart from that, there have been growing tensions with China and the geopolitical flex. So when I say growing tensions with China, so trade war is an example with China, and the geopolitical flux that has been existing after Britain's exit from the European Union. So all these factors have placed India and UK at the critical juncture, right? So these factors, so they have impacted both India plus UK, and these factors have brought India and UK to a very critical juncture, a critical point where both these countries can start realign their interests in trade, commerce, defense, security, and the technology partnerships, right? So that's where India and UK have been trying to sign a free trade agreement, right? So here you can understand what exactly is a free trade agreement. So free trade agreement is an accord between two or more nations to reduce the barriers to trade, right, with respect to exports and imports. Now, what are the strategic complementarities and the economic interests which are existing between both India and China? So let's try to understand this dimension as well. So first thing that we should understand here, that Britain views India as a key player, right? So actually for Britain, after Brexit, India is a key player, so that Britain can actually anchor its vision of global Britain. Its vision of global Britain. Now, in the Indo-Pacific policy of Britain, so India can actually play a very important role, or an instrumental role. An instrumental role that India can play in Britain's Indo-Pacific strategy, because Britain also wanted to balance China. So once Britain was a hegemonic power, US has replaced Britain as a hegemonic power in the world. So therefore Britain have the policy called Global Britain, and in Global Britain's policy of UK, Indo-Pacific is one of the most instrumental and most important strategy to balance China, and India can actually play an instrumental role in this. And Britain has also been looking for economic diversification. Now, what exactly is an economic diversification? So Britain will not just depend on European Union, North America. Rather, Britain would look for the markets around the world, including India, and that is the key reason which has been pushing Britain to sign a free trade agreement with India. I hope it is clear for you. And next, there are areas. For example, we have talked about the trade, defense and technology, manufacturing, digital innovation, education, clean energy. So all these factors have been offering some natural grounds so that India and UK can arrive at a synergy, right? Because UK's capital and UK can actually provide capital, and UK also have the rich R&D ecosystem, right? So therefore India and UK can actually build synergy in all these different areas. And apart from that, in recent times India's industrial capacity has also been substantially expanding, right? So this industrial capacity has been substantially increasing through policies like Make in India program, Skill India program, and India's sustained emphasis on the skilling and vocational and technical education, right? So signing of this India and UK free trade agreement, so it is not just about the trade and commerce between India and UK, but it is a strategic pivot for both countries, right? So it will be considered as a strategic pivot for both India and UK, so thereby it will symbolizing a deeper cooperation amidst the global order, which is shifting gradually, right? So you can also go through the strategic benefits of the free trade agreement between India and UK as well, right? So the PDF of this particular class is also available in the description section, and you can directly access the PDF of this class as well, so that you can go through these points again. Now after that, we need to understand the political dynamics and strategic forecast between India and UK relations. Now in fact, the bipartisan support in India and the more pragmatic support and stance from the British Labour Party under Keir Starmer, especially in contrast to the earlier anti-India views that were adopted in UK leadership. So all these factors have created a political conditions or a conducive environment for a long-term bilateral relations, and that is key to strengthen India and UK relations, and that is the point where India and UK have arrived at a common ground to sign a free trade agreement, and we'll understand the significant benefits of the free trade agreement between India and UK as well. And apart from that, we have to understand one thing, that India's location in the Indian Ocean region. Now Indian Ocean region is gaining a lot of importance because of China, because of Russia, and middle powers like India, Japan, South Korea, Australia. Because of all these countries, Indian Ocean has been gaining a lot of importance, and Chinese assertiveness and Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean region has also been substantially increasing in recent times. However, number of countries in Europe, they have their own Indo-Pacific strategy. So therefore here India's position in the Indian Ocean region is very, very important. And apart from that, we have a large skilled diaspora in the UK as well, and the large skilled diaspora mostly from India and Britain's global financial and educational institutions. So all these factors are the leveraging points for mutual diplomatic as well as the cultural relations, mutual diplomatic as well as strong cultural relations between India and UK. So these factors have to be understood in a very clear manner. And in fact, it is being said that there has been emerging multipolar world. Now what is an emerging multipolar world? So in a world order which is dominated by multiple centers of power, whether it is US, Russia, China, and some powers in Europe, Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, Saudi Arabia. So these are multiple centers of power, which is called as a multipolar world order, in contrast to unipolar world order, which is dominated by US, and bipolar world order, which was existing during the Cold War, right? So therefore the world is viewed as a multipolar world, and with declining US primacy or declining US hegemony around the world, or China is more aggressive, more assertive now, right? So China is more aggressive and more assertive, China and Russia, and the divide within the West, particularly with respect to NATO. So all these factors actually offer India and the UK a good opportunity to position themselves as a credible and democratic middle powers. Now, as I've already told you, that India is a middle power and UK is also now a middle power, right? So all these factors which have been taking place, they actually offer an opportunity for India and UK to position themselves as a credible democratic middle powers, right? So what is the significance of India UK free trade agreement? So if you look at the significance of India UK free trade agreement, UK is the 16th largest trading partner and India is the 11th largest trading partner to UK. And similarly, the bilateral trade between India and UK stands at 60 billion, with India enjoying a huge trade surplus. So that is the benefit and that is the advantage of India, because India has been enjoying a trade surplus with UK, and if you can actually sign a free trade agreement with UK, so this will potentially benefit India furthering its trade. So however, the 60 billion trade between India and UK is lesser than the actual potential between these two countries. So therefore there is a need to enormously increase the trade between these two countries, and UK even estimates the free trade agreement could boost trade by another 34 billion US dollars. So this is the estimation of UK, right? So this is important in the backdrop of the global geopolitics and the global flux. So amid all these factors, the free trade agreement is very, very important between India and UK. right? I hope you have understood this topic. And the next important topic is a World Bank's recent report on Indian cities. So we'll be understanding what World Bank has said about Indian cities. So what is its context, right? So a World Bank has recently released a report, and this report has actually projected that by the year 2030 Indian cities will create 70% of new jobs, right? So Indian cities have the potential to create around 70% of new jobs, right? But despite creating 70% new jobs by the Indian cities, there is a risk of losing around $5 billion every year, right? So Indian cities will lose around $5 billion every year. That is because of the floods which have been taking place. Now Indian cities are also increasingly vulnerable to the urban floods. So therefore the solution needs to be the climate resilient infrastructure, right? So there is a need to build climate resilient infrastructure in Indian cities, and better urban planning along with that the climate resilient infrastructure, so that can actually minimize the annual losses because of the climate change, and cities will remain as engines of growth. So it is famously said that in India cities are called as engines of economic growth, because around 65 to 70% of India's GDP comes from the Indian cities. So therefore the focus should be on climate resilient infrastructure and better urban planning. Otherwise Indian cities would lose around 5 billion every year from 2030 onwards. So therefore it actually highlights there is an urgent need for a sustainable urban development in the face of the climate related threats that Indian cities have been facing. Now understand one thing, that Indian cities have been excessively facing the problem of the urban floods. So whether it is Delhi, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Chennai, in all these different cities we regularly see floods. So therefore resilient urban infrastructure needs to be built, and apart from that a better and careful planning is also important. Now what are the key findings on urban growth and climate risks that have been provided by the World Bank in this report? Now it is being said that now this is very important data, and you can use this data in your answers, and you can also code this data in your interviews as well. Now it is being said that by 2050 India's urban population will nearly double to 951 million. So this is actually a huge number of people who will be living in urban areas by the year 2050. So however 2011 census says that so around 30% of India's population are actually living in the urban areas, but by 2050 around 90 crore people will live in urban areas. So thereby it will be one of the fastest urban transformations in the history of mankind. And apart from that, so by 2030 cities will also generate around 70% of all new employment or new job opportunities. So thereby cities will remain as the engines of growth rate. So they will remain act as a engines of growth and even the urbanizing landscape. However, urban areas, they increasingly face threats of flooding, right? So they increasingly face threats from flooding and extreme heat as well, right? So in recent times the incidents of extreme heat waves are also increasing, and heat wave related deaths have also been increasing. So therefore the urban areas will also face increasing threats from the flooding and the extreme heat. So extreme heat, which is because of the urban heat island, and apart from that cities are being called as concrete jungles, they're being called as concrete jungles. They absorb enormous amount of heat, and apart from that, the pollution levels are also increasing in the urban centers. So all these factors have been leading to the extreme heat events or heat wave like conditions. Now flooding is because of poor maintenance of the drainage system. So drainage system is very often clogging because of the plastic pollution. So therefore this has been highlighting the need for the robust solid waste management network, the robust solid waste management network that India should actually have. So however, the exposure of the urban centers to extreme heat stress increased to 71% between 1983 to 2016. So there is an enormous increase in the exposure of urban centers to the heat stress, and that is being further worsened by the increased urban heat effect and increasing frequency of extreme weather events as well. However, the heat related deaths are also expected to be doubled over 3 lakh annually by 2050. So 3 lakh deaths because of heat related problems is also a very huge challenge and problem that the urban centers need to address. So therefore there is a need for mitigation measures, right? So for example, the heat wave action plans, the heat wave action plans need to be put in place with many cities facing the problem of heat waves. So there is a need for a decentralized approach along with the heat wave action plans in every city. Now what are the recommendations for a climate resilient infrastructure building and investment that has to be made in these urban centers? So it is being said that Indian cities need around 2.4 trillion by the year 2050. So 2.4 trillion US dollars required for creating the climate resilient infrastructure and also to implement the low carbon infrastructure solution. So which is a huge amount of financial backing that is actually required to make the urban centers climate resilient and also bring in low carbon infrastructure solutions as well. And apart from that, the flooding in urban areas is also another major problem. So therefore the annual losses because of the regular flooding, it could even reach $5 billion by the year 2030, and it could be around 30 billion by 2070 as well. So without a proper action on this urban flooding, so the urban areas will continue to face enormous losses. So therefore there is a need for a flood mitigation measures and improved storm water absorption capacity as well, so that will help mitigating the urban floods. However, the suggested interventions including enhancing private sector engagement, creating financing roadmaps, and even improving the municipal capacities for a climate smart city planning are some of the interventions that needs to be undertaken in this regard. However, the adaptation strategies like urban greening, early warning systems, cool roofs, so they could actually save around 1.3 lakh lives in these urban areas because of the heat related challenges or increased heat wave conditions in the urban centers. However, empowering cities with the financial and the administrative autonomy, so that is the need of the 73rd and 74th. So here we need to talk about the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. Under 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, there is a need for a more of financial and administrative autonomy, so more devolution of powers and functions to the urban local self-governance institutions, and which is crucial for a climate mitigation and adaptation measures, including development of a risk sensitive land use planning. Now if we talk about the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act and the urban governance, so this 74th Constitutional Amendment Act that was brought into effect in the year 1992, so that has provided constitutional status. That has provided what? Constitutional status to the urban local bodies. So thereby aiming at strengthening the local self-governance institutions. However, despite the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, many states have not fully implemented the provisions under the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, thereby limiting the city level autonomy. And apart from that, the report also says that cities with greater autonomy, they perform better managing climate risks and mobilizing resources for a resilient urban development. And in fact, there is a need to bring in flexibility for the implementation of number of programs, and considering the local conditions and the governance structures is also very important here. So thereby full or partial adoption of the 74th Amendment is seen as a key enabler for the cities to invest in climate adaptation and conduct through the risk assessment as well. So therefore the stress needs to be on 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, and apart from that, there is a need for the financial and administrative autonomy should be given to the local self-governance institutions in urban areas, and that will help tackle the problems of heat wave and urban flooding as well. So the next important topic is powers of president and governor. Right, so because recently the Supreme Court issues notice to the states and to the center on powers of president and governor. So let's look into it. So what is the context? The context is that the Supreme Court has agreed to hear the presidential reference under Article 143 of the Indian Constitution. Right, so in fact, under Article 143, so under Article 143 it talks about the advisory jurisdiction, right? So therefore the Supreme Court has agreed to hear the presidential reference under Article 143 of the Indian Constitution, which seeks a clarity on the constitutional powers and timelines concerning presidents and governors assent to the state bills under Article 200 and Article 201 of the Indian Constitution. So recently Article 200 and Article 201 are in news. So why they are in news? Because the Tamil Nadu state government filed a petition in the Supreme Court saying that the governor is not giving assent to the bills which are passed by the state legislative assemblies. Now in this case, the Supreme Court has held that the president and the governor must give assent to the bills passed by the state legislative assemblies within the 3 months. So therefore the Supreme Court has set timelines for the governor and the president. So after this judgment, the president cited a reference to Article 143 seeking clarity on the constitutional powers and timelines concerning the presidents and governors to the Supreme Court. So therefore, the Supreme Court has agreed to hear this presidential reference. Now in Article 143, which is talking about advisory jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, right? So therefore you have to remember this because this is very important. So Article 143 talks about the advisory jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So under this, president can actually seek opinion of the Supreme Court on questions of law or fact of public importance. And in fact, the court may, after such hearing as it deems fit, report its opinion to the president, but its opinion is not binding on the president as well. Right? So therefore, what does Article 200 of the Indian Constitution says? So Article 200 of the Indian Constitution, it empowers the governors. For example, when the state legislature passes a bill and the bill will be presented to the governor for his or her assent. Now under Article 200 of the Indian Constitution, the governor will have the following options. So he can give the assent to the bill, he can withhold the assent to the bill, and he can reserve the bill for the reconsideration of the president, and he can even return the bill for the reconsideration of the state legislative assembly as well. However, in case of a money bill, the governor will not send the bill for the reconsideration of the state legislative assembly. However, the problem is that Article 200 of the Indian Constitution, Article 200 of the Indian Constitution is not talking about the timeline within which the governor or the president must give assent to the bills passed by the state legislative assembly, and that is the key problem here. Now Article 201, it talks about the president's assent on reserved bills. Right, so it says that if a bill is reserved for the president, he may either give his assent to the bill or withhold his assent to the bill. However, there is no timeline which is prescribed for the president also within which he or she should give his assent to the bills passed by the state legislature. Now here the presidential reference seeks to examine whether courts can impose the judicial timelines in the absence of such express provisions. Right, so the presidential reference under Article 143 of the Indian Constitution to examine whether courts can impose the judicial timelines, because recently the Supreme Court has imposed 3 months of a judicial timeline on the president and governor to give assent to the bills passed by the state legislative assembly. So under Article 143, the presidential reference has been cited as an advisory jurisdiction. Now, what is the judicial interpretation of the constitutional powers? Right, so if we talk about the judicial interpretation of the constitutional powers, the reference actually raises key issues regarding the separation of powers, because it is related to the legislative wing or the executive branch of the government. So therefore, judiciary setting a timeline for the president is being viewed as the interference in the functions of the executive or the legislature by the judiciary. So therefore, the reference under Article 143 of the Indian Constitution raises key issues regarding the separation of powers between the 3 branches of the government: legislature, executive and judiciary, and it is also being viewed as a judicial overreach on the part of the judiciary, the ambit of Article 142 of the Indian Constitution. So Article 142 of the Indian Constitution talks about the power of the Supreme Court to do complete justice in any case, which allows for the Supreme Court to pass any order necessary for being complete justice or doing complete justice. Right, so in Tamil Nadu, governors in Tamil Nadu, state legislative assembly has been passing a number of bills, but the problem was the governor was not giving his assent to the bills, and that's why Tamil Nadu has approached the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court has given the directions to the governor and president under Article 142 of the Indian Constitution, and the Supreme Court has also set a timeline of 3 months for the governor and president to give his or her assent to the bills passed by the state legislative assemblies as well. And after that, the president under Article 143 of the Indian Constitution sought an advisory jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Right, I hope you have understood this topic. And next important topic is the Devadasi system. Right, so recently Karnataka government planning to bring a new law to fight the Devadasi system. What exactly is a Devadasi system? So Devadasi system is a practice, a regressive practice, I would say, a regressive practice. So a regressive practice which is derogatory to the dignity of woman. Right, so derogatory to the dignity of woman. So dignity and modesty of woman under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Now, what exactly is a Devadasi system? So Devadasi system is attaching young girls to the temples. Right, so attaching young girls to the temples. attaching young girls to the temples is what is called as the Devadasi system, which is a regressive practice and which is derogatory to the dignity of women, which has been violating Article 21 of the Indian Constitution, right? So however, the Devadasi system, despite a legal protection, despite the legal measures, the Devadasi system is still in practice in some states like Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. So therefore, recently the Karnataka government has been planning to bring a new law to fight Devadasi system. Now, why it is a Devadasi system? So why attaching young girls to the temples? So young girls are being attached to the temples and they are being considered as wives of the god. However, the upper caste men have been misusing this Devadasi system. So the Devadasi woman will not marry. So they just marry the god only. So they will completely dedicated their entire life to the temples alone. However, the upper caste men used to sexually exploit women, right? So therefore, this law will fight the Devadasi system, right? So under this Devadasi system, Karnataka already passed a law, which is the Devadasi Prohibition and Dedication 1982 law, right? So however, this is a 4-decade-old law, 4-decade-old law that was passed by the Karnataka state government. So the problem is that the 4-decade-old law has not addressed some issues which are existing. So for example, if this a woman, Devadasi woman, have children, so who will be the father? So for example, the children of the Devadasi woman, so they have the right to identify their father. So they have the right to undergo a DNA test to identify their father. And apart from that, once the father is identified, so the children of this Devadasi woman will also have the right to inheritance to the property from the father. So therefore, giving all these rights and rehabilitation resettlement, the Karnataka government has been planning to bring a new law on this Devadasi system, and this is also very, very important for your mains examination and your for interview as well. So anyway, that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much.